All right, I've got a happier green light. Let me do a quick look and see if that means we're live where we're supposed to be. Yep. Live on YouTube. Live on Facebook. I think our technical challenges have been solved here. So let's get this show on the road. From the studio in the bonus room above the garage on the north side of Cary, at the foot of Mount Belzoni, this is the Triangle Talk Show. I'm Gary Pierce, and I think the show is, episode 92. It's an activist episode. Oh, notice there's no Jen and there's no Brendan, because it's a midweek show and those guys got to work. Raleigh's Floyd protest and riot, question mark. June 1st, 2021. Going to add on this little tack-on sign, no justice, no peace. And my friend Elizabeth Crudup has recruited a bunch of folks for me to put together a show, and sort of a last minute thing. These are all folks that have been involved in the protest movement, and I'm not sure about the riot part in Raleigh over the weekend and last night. And let me introduce them. I see we've lost one, and we may get them back on the Zoom conference here just in a moment. In the upper right-hand corner is Dawn Blakelove. Dawn is from Emancipate NC, and Dawn, welcome to the Triangle Talk Show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and Don is back.
I'm back.
Okay, you got yourself inside. So we're just we're introducing everybody. Dawn, I don't know the DAWN, Dawn. I don't know very much about who you are and what you do. Give me the elevator pitch, 30-second. Who the heck are you?
Okay. I'm an attorney. I am the executive director of Emancipate NC. Emancipate NC is an organization that is committed to demolishing and dismantling mass incarceration and institutional racism that exists within the criminal justice system. We do that through community educating, through and our primary focus area issues are reforming and abolishing cash bail, police accountability, any ways that we can reduce the throes of people who are currently incarcerated. Before I came to Emancipate NC, I worked as an attorney for North Carolina Prisoners Legal Services. I did post-conviction work for the 37,000 incarcerated people in North Carolina. And currently, we are involved in civil litigation to try to help free some of the people who are incarcerated right now in very dangerous situations due to COVID. Thanks for having me.
And so what I'm getting from that is that you deal with people who are invisible.
Are invisible, people who are marginalized, people who through systemic racism and oppression have been taught to forget that they have the power. And our job is to help them remember that they are empowered, remember the power that they have, and then give them the tools to use the power that they have to effectuate the change that they need.
All right. And in the lower left-hand corner is John Butler. Let me find your title here, John. You are a pastor, Reverend John Butler, pastor at the Open Table United Methodist Church in downtown Raleigh. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Welcome to the show, and what do you do there?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm Jason, and I am the senior pastor over here at Open Table United Methodist Church. We are near downtown, kind of near the Krispy Kreme over here at downtown Raleigh. And, we're just a progressive, inclusive, affirming church, then want to do good in our community, want to stand for justice and against the forces of any sort of oppression that keep people down. So we believe that's a calling of all churches everywhere, and we're just trying to live into that.
Okay. And in the lower right-hand corner is Don, not Dawn, Don Lewis. And sorry for calling, and Jason, sorry for John. I got John written down in several places and I'm changing them as fast as I can. Don Lewis, get your title going here. Community activist, and what Elizabeth told me to call you was the barber.
The barber, yeah, that's fine. I also go by that also.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, first of all, I would like to say to Don, thank you, and to the pastor also, thank you. But Don, I represent the other side of that. So I'm actually a convicted felon. I've been out 5 years, coming in August. I was locked up for a total of 9 years for cocaine trafficking. While serving my 9-year sentence at Harnett Correctional Institution, I received an associate's degree in business, a bachelor's degree from Shaw University, summa cum laude, and that's also where I received my barber's license. Taught myself how to trade stocks. I'm actively trading and investing in stocks also, and also taught myself to speak Spanish. So I counter what Don is actually doing for guys like me. But more importantly, I'm also constantly giving back, and I have constant contact with the North Carolina DPS and the prison system, where I actually go back and speak to all their barbering graduating classes, and I go to some of the NA and AA programs and just give the guys hope, because like you said, they are invisible and they are marginalized, and a lot of people really don't understand how separate they are from the rest of society, and some of them have no attachment to society. So a guy like me coming in there that's been in the same shoes as them, they welcome me with open arms, and I love doing it, and I look forward to doing it every chance I get.
Hey, Don, I'm also a friend of Bill Wilson and a graduate of NA, so
okay,
give you a fist bump there.
Definitely.
And in the upper right-hand corner, rounding things out, is Zack Fowler. What is the New Leaders Council? You're a fellow at the New Leaders Council. You're also the youngest person here, probably, and Elizabeth wanted me to refer to you as the kid.
I'll take the nickname. I will. So the New Leaders Council is a national nonprofit that is committed to educating and equipping the next wave of progressive leadership that either wants to lead through public service and through running for office, or in the nonprofit sector, or in their local communities. So it's a 6-month fellowship that takes place all across the country. Some states have multiple chapters. North Carolina has one, and so I'm a fellow with the North Carolina chapter of NLC. That's what's kept me very connected to a lot of the demonstrations that have been happening recently, because a number of my fellows have been out in the streets, either in Fayetteville or in Charlotte or in Raleigh, being a part of these demonstrations. And so I've been looped in there. I'm also no stranger to those demonstrations myself. I've been a marshal for demonstrations before in Alamance County in downtown Raleigh, and closer to where I live in Carborough. Grew up in Sanford, so I've known North Carolina for most of my life, and I'm also involved in a number of different education initiatives throughout the state too. I serve on the board of 2 different education organizations.
What is the age group that you're generally working with? Is it school students or?
Well, so my work ranges pretty widely, but we're looking mostly at high schoolers are the people that I work with most closely. NLC is folks who are between, I think the youngest folks are probably right out of undergrad, and the oldest folks are probably in their mid-50s, early 60s even, depending on where they are in their career. They might just be new to political service. They might just be new to this stage in their professional lives, but no age requirement there.
Okay, so new is new to leadership, not necessarily just young.
That's right.
Even though you're the kid. All right. Thursday night, George Lewis was, I think we all agree he was murdered.
George Floyd.
George Floyd. I'm bad with names. George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. The whole country erupted by Friday night. It took Raleigh another night. We didn't start erupting until Saturday night, and it erupted again on Sunday night, last night. And are we, who knows what's going to happen tonight? Or are we going to count? There's a curfew, an 8:00 curfew. Do we think it's going to happen again tonight?
I don't think so. There may be some small brush fires here and there, but nothing big like what happened downtown Saturday night or Sunday night. I don't think so. Or what happened last night at North Hills. I don't think, and that wasn't even that big. That was actually contained also, and at Triangle Town Center Mall. Yeah, I think the the very energetic parts of that rioting, I think it's been spent. And so now I think this is a good time for the dialogue to come now. I think the curfew is going to have a lot to do with it if they're really going to enforce it. But who's to say? You know, anything can just spark off. It takes so small. It takes so little to spark that kind of activity. You know, you never know. But I'm pretty sure that it's mostly spent.
Yeah, Durham had a curfew last night, and that worked. Fayetteville had a curfew last night, and that worked. Durham didn't need to because Durham never had any violence. They had 2 protests on Saturday night. I didn't see anything in the news for Durham last night. I'm not sure if anything happened.
Can I speak to that? Because I think that's an important point, and I want us to talk about that and talk about the difference between the responses and the difference between what we saw as the outcome. Yeah. And ultimately, the difference is the way the law enforcement that were on the scene engaged the protesters. What we saw and what you have in Durham is a chief of police who is incredibly responsive to the community and is very, very sensitive to trying to maintain the trust and the respect of the folks that she is charged with policing. And because of that, she made sure her officers were not in tactical gear. She made sure that they were not militarized. And she made sure that they had strict instructions not to antagonize the folks that were in the crowd. What we saw in Raleigh and in other cities, or at Charlotte and Fayetteville and other cities around the state, where we did not have that type of leadership from law enforcement. And what we saw was law enforcement antagonizing protesters in a way that incited some of the violence that we saw. They were incredibly complicit in creating the end results and the destruction. And I would also like to say that they were not just complicit in creating and being the agitators. Once things got going, I would offer that they purposely stood back and allowed the destruction to reach the levels that it did. I believe that because in Raleigh Police Department specifically, there is absolutely a sense that it is the community against law enforcement, them against us. And when you take an antagonistic stance against the people that you are supposed to serve and protect, what happens is what we saw in Raleigh and what we saw in Fayetteville and what we saw in cities all across the country. And that is the difference between what happened in Durham and what happened everywhere else. It is the leadership and the antagonistic militarized police and their response to the people that are in the streets that caused that.
Yeah, Don, I completely echo that. I was out there last night, and when it was smaller crowd, but there was a more immediate response. And so what we saw was a peaceful protest at 6 o'clock to 6:45, and then around 6:45, the police hurled in tear gas. It wasn't a big crowd, and so there was nothing provoked. I was there as sort of just trying to be a person of peace, as a person of faith, wearing my collar, and so the moment that the police showed up, everything changed. It went from a peaceful protest to tense, like you could feel it in the crowd. They showed up in their tactical gear, hundreds of them. I mean, they almost person for person. Equal number of police officers, and they look literally like machines coming in. And like what we know about stress responses, our brain is when we feel threatened, we go into fight or flight mode. And immediately the crowd went into fight or flight mode in that moment. The crowd would have been fine. And we saw this on multiple moments. It was a very tense standoff. And then finally the police back down, and we go over to the governor's mansion, and it was completely peaceful, 100%. People were just hanging out. There wasn't even chanting. And I think that the protest would have probably ended right there if the police hadn't showed up. We were out of steam. We were done. and we did what we came to do. But the police showed up again, and one empty water bottle was thrown, or like barely anything in it, and immediately 3-4 things of tear gas hit the crowd. And then here come pushing back the line. They're in their formation, their line, and they're pushing back in tactical gear. And like I was right there. People like 6'5", intimidating with batons. Like the police here have completely messed up their response. And I think you see it across the country, Don, exactly what you're speaking of. When the police forces are trusted by their communities, have done the hard work of getting in to know their communities, the community leaders, Black pastors, Black organizers, Black leaders in their community, when they feel heard, like we see all across the country, the police are out there with them, and there's no violence, there's no threats. And that's what we're lacking here in Raleigh, is it immediately becomes a standoff between protests, because protesters are seen as threats, as no good, you shouldn't be here.
Yeah, just to build off this, I mean, I think there are two things here. One is, I think people tend to forget that a lot of organizing groups, a lot of social activist groups are trained in de-escalation. They're trained to anticipate that tense, that flight or fight response that Jason's describing. They're trained to know that's going to happen in a large crowd in a demonstration like this, and they have practiced how to bring that down, how to respond if the group is off message, how to respond if the group is feeling tense or threatened. And it seems to me, from what we've seen the past few days, that the Raleigh PD is largely trained in one thing, and that's escalation, right? And to see the disproportionate response as well, I would imagine, I can't say this for sure, but I would imagine if the moment after that, as Jason said, that water bottle was thrown, if there had been a pause, I guarantee you that crowd would not have escalated further. I guarantee you either would have been ignored, or one of the organizers would have touched base with that person, or someone else would have started a song or a chant, and it would have been settled and recentered. But they responded with such disproportionate force, the crowd panics. And of course, why wouldn't they? Right? They're being hit with a deadly chemical. They're being, well, not deadly chemical, but a disruptive chemical, something that could cause a lot of harm. It's not a surprise at all. And I think to go back to this Raleigh-Durham contrast, Durham's not perfect in terms of its public service. It's got plenty of areas to grow. But, just last year, there was a vote in Durham to expand the Durham PD that was struck down by the city council. And that was largely due to the efforts of a lot of organizers in Durham, great culture there around that. And instead, the money was reallocated to increase living wage for people that are employed by the city. And that's the kind of structural thinking you want to see in these contexts, right? To bring money away from militarizing police departments and into the hands of folks who are trying to address some of the structural issues that might take them out into the streets in the first place, that might, complicate their lives overall, and in ways that are extremely based on race. And so I think you're seeing that contrast as well. I mean, you can go back a couple years, and the more you look into the political histories of the two towns, you see the kind of fuses or lack thereof for a moment like what you see this weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Zach, I last night, I think I was so overly impressed with the group of, it seemed like the protest was kind of being run by a handful of African-American females, probably in their 20s. And I was so impressed at their ability to de-escalate the crowd. At one point at the governor's mansion, this white guy jumped the guardian rail, goes over, knocks it over, and a handful of people rush the gate at the governor's mansion. And immediately the young women said, no, stop, and pulled them back. And we put back up the railing to try, because they knew this is bad news. Like, we're not here to create trouble. We're here to have our concerns. So I was just so overly impressed. And as one who was there, it was completely peaceful. The crowd was trying to be peaceful. The crowd just wanted to have their concerns heard.
Okay, can I chime in real quick?
Yeah.
I love this conversation. I love the comments you guys are making. I'm gonna go far left. I was out there on the ground Saturday. I actually spoke Saturday, and I actually was at the beginning of the march. Like you guys said, everything was peaceful. There were no police involved during the actual speaking ceremony or the beginning of the march. After about an hour of marching around downtown, the first time we confronted the police or had any kind of confrontation with the police, it went crazy. That's when all the running around, that's when all the tear gas, all the mace, that's when the militarization style of policing came out. From that point on, for the rest of the night, well, we know what happened. Now, I keep hearing peace. and I keep hearing peace, and I keep hearing it when on social media. I keep hearing the word peace on the news. I'm hearing it now a lot. And I understand, but I think speaking from a black man that's hands-on with 3 sons and 1 grandson, some of us aren't really ready for peace. And some of us are okay with it not being peace. Some of us are okay with riot and looting and stealing. Because when you, as a black man growing up here in America, 44 years, especially down here in the South, I'm from Raleigh, born and raised, things that I've had to encounter, years of that builds up rage. And when you can't properly let it out because you fear consequences, because I can't walk over to the police station now and say, I'm tired of y'all beating up my brothers on Bragg Street and Martin Street and Kentwood and Raleigh Gardens and slamming them on their face on the curb, and it's not being recorded, but we know it's happening. I'm on the ground. I'm sorry. I see it every day. I can't just go over there and just start arguing that argument and it gets heard. And so when you have a bunch of youth, especially African-American youth and adults also, that just have this pent up rage from the things that's going on. I mean, like, you know, everybody knows what's going on. We know we have a target on our back in ways that even some of our other citizens don't even understand. Like, you have no idea what it's like to be walking down New Bern Avenue or Pool Road and just get slammed on your face. And it happens on a regular basis. This is everyday stuff. And this is the stuff that I was addressing with the sheriff yesterday during the conference. This is stuff that the community does not see. The stuff African-American males getting beat up is a everyday occurrence right here in our city. This is every day. Somebody today has got slammed on their face on concrete or the curb. I can guarantee that on one of those blocks. I can almost guarantee that. And so with that being said, when I keep hearing people screaming, peace, 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 well, where's the peace when you coming in my community beating up my little brothers and sisters? Where's the peace then? Where is the peace? You know what I'm saying? It seems like they only start screaming peace when we start rioting.
When it's us. Yes.
No, I'm all right. I'm okay with the looting. I'm okay with the burning. I'm being honest. I'm okay with all of it because if we study history and we study rioting, we know it all goes hand in hand. It is the expression of rage and built up tension and anger. And you totally have to understand it. You totally have to understand it because if you don't, you will look at those people as criminals and the so-called peaceful protesters as the good people. No, we are all the same. Yep. The good,
and Don, I will take it a step further than what you're saying and say this. Not only will I not condemn the violence or whatever the case may be, it is the only thing that has ever driven America to change its policies as it relates to Black people.
Yes.
It is the only thing that brings them to a table to talk about policy change is when they are afraid that we are going to tear down and burn down the country that we built. So no. And I also take strong issue with this idea that we're going to demonize folks that are tearing up buildings and whatever they're doing, burning and looting and separate that violence from the core violence, right? From the original sin of violence that they are responding to.
Why we here?
Violence, which is the violence of law enforcement, right?
Right. Exactly.
If it were not for that original violence, then no other violence would be happening.
Exactly.
So it is not fair, and I rebuke and I reject any narrative that says that the place where we start talking about violence is on the streets, unless we are talking about the violence that law enforcement for centuries in this country has effectuated on Black and brown bodies, because that's the only violence we need to be talking about. And that is the only place where blame for that violence should be put.
Exactly.
I would just finish the press conference like literally minutes before I got here. And one of the questions the officer asked me one of the reporters asked was, if you were the chief of police in Raleigh on Saturday night, what would you have done? My answer was, if I was the chief of police on Saturday night, I would have been a chief of police a year ago and a decade ago. And what I would have done then was made sure that the people who were marginalized in my community didn't feel marginalized, that I wasn't over policing Black and brown communities, that I wasn't harassing and dehumanizing my Black boys and girls on the south side, I almost said the south side of Chicago, in Southeast Raleigh on a daily basis. So these folks would not need to be in the streets expressing their rage. The second thing I want to say about this narrative about folks who are tearing things up is that the question itself is rooted in a form of classism, right? Mm-hmm. Because what we're saying is because they don't have the words or the historical context to put into words to articulate what they're feeling, then some way their feelings are not valid. They are articulating and expressing their rage, their anger, their fears in the way that feels best to them. And who am I, and who are any of us, to question how someone responds and reacts to being dehumanized their entire life, over-criminalized their entire life, degraded and treated like less than human their entire life? How dare us not talk about the fact that these people have grown up feeling this way, but instead focus on the way they respond to it? How dare us?
Could you, real quick, could you guys just imagine for a second being a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old child in the Black community, and your only vision of the police is them coming in there, beating up little boys and girls and slamming them on the ground and kicking doors down and kicking in doors to houses where they had the wrong address, which happens way more frequently than it gets reported. In case you didn't know, that happens that's very common in lower income neighborhoods. So with that being said, you have to put yourself on our shoes, and I know it's hard, but can you imagine what a child's going to think as an adult after seeing that their entire life? The only behavior they see from police is actually the same criminal behavior that the police are telling them the criminals are doing.
Yeah. Also, like, I think we gotta know too, right? That, like, obviously police are the center of all this at the moment, of course, but it's not like racism only exists in police departments, right? And so when we tell people, hey, get off the streets, like, do it the quote unquote right way or the peaceful way, what do you want them to do? You want to tell them to go vote? Great. Voter suppression, widely spread all across this state. We're gerrymandered beyond all belief. So if you want them to go through the quote unquote proper channels, chances that their voice or their desired impact ever sees the light of the day is null, right? I mean, there aren't many options outside of that. I mean, you tell them what, to go start their own businesses, to go start their own initiatives, with what capital, with what social capital, with what financial capital? What are you talking about, right? So I think it's literally just this like deep-seated thing that we're taught from 1 and 2 years old, that violence is inherently bad, but violence is a part of righteous rage. Violence is a part of justified anger, and anger is a sign of values being stepped on, right? And so when you see anger out in the streets, when you see anger in people, that's a useful emotion, right? I mean, that has something to do with where they are and where they want to be, and we need to be listening to that.
I don't want to derail this, but I wanted to point out something my wife showed me just a moment ago, and I'll steal a little bit of footage from the WTVD ABC 11 helicopter. Protesters have shut down NC 147 just outside of downtown Durham. The close-up shot that we're looking at right now doesn't show all of what happens. Looks like it'll widen out a little bit. It looks like it may be 50, maybe 100 people, and generally looks peaceful at this point. There's no interaction between them and the police. Obviously, there's police there, but nothing much going on. I can't steal their footage for very long because it's theirs. Doesn't belong to me. But I wanted to put that in a little bit. I can confirm to all of you guys that as a 70-year-old guy who has lived in suburban white America for all of his life, yeah, you don't see it. You see it on TV. That's the only place you see it. You see it on TV. It doesn't register. How do you get it to register with guys like me? You're thinking hard about that.
Well, I mean, it's I don't know. It's just you have to be sympathetic and empathetic to the reality, to what you really see what's going on. I mean, even I don't care if you're 7 or 70. Reality is reality. It is a reality that African American males have a target on their back. This is what we live. This is what I wake up to every day. This is what I worry about with my sons every day. If you're having a hard time empathizing with that, it's an even harder time trying to explain it and trying to get you to empathize or sympathize with that. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I've been working hard on the concept that I got a while ago that if I say I don't get it, I'm right, because I'm not ever going to really get it. I'm not going to ever really understand your life.
Do you understand oppression?
I understand that, and I understand from a very outsider's perspective what's going on with you and why you would be very angry. It's very hard to get it deep into my head and into my soul to understand what's going on. We got two other white guys here. How well do you guys get it? How did you get it?
Well, for me, I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for 10 years. And
okay, wait. Stop it. You did not live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for 10 years.
Yeah, I did.
I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
What? 68th and Burleigh. That's where I live.
29th and Roosevelt. That's where I live. Okay, go ahead.
Go Bruce City.
By the way, I grew up in Chicago, so nearby, suburb of Milwaukee.
For me, like, I grew up in rural Virginia. Like, I'm a hillbilly. And so, like, there were a handful of black folk where I grew up. And so for me, the only way that I began to understand it was to live with people who were experiencing and become friends with people who were experienced as a pastor and see my friends, my congregants being terrorized, see them kept out of the economic future of a city. And that's what for me began to break my heart is I had to live next to people. And see the police show up at their house and see their sons terrorized and see the conversations and hear the conversations. And so for me, that's how it happened for me. I can't speak for other people, but I do know, I'm a white male, obviously. And the thing about white males is most of the time, white males don't listen to anybody but other white males. And I think that there is a responsibility for white males in America to speak up and hold other white males accountable to their thoughts, to their thinking, to their actions, and to call people out. And, that for me is important. But I mean, I'd love to also hear from Don and Don, like the white community's involvement is so important in this. And so what can the white community do?
Well, I'm sorry, Don. Let me go.
Go ahead, Don. You got it.
Okay, I was actually just speaking on this earlier, and Pastor, I'm so glad you brought it up, and I'm very proud of you for bringing it up because Saturday, what I noticed during these demonstrations, there were just as many white people there as black people involved in the mechanics of the movement from the beginning to the end, from the speak to the rally, all the way through the riots, and came back out. And, and it was, you can just feel like the spirit of togetherness, like, okay, this isn't a black and white thing anymore. This is actually like a people and police thing now. And so like, it's, for that moment, and I don't know if it's going to last. I don't know if it's just for a moment, but it just seemed like all the color lines were blurred just for that moment. And so, and there was this saying this white lady told me Saturday. She had a sign and it said, white silence equals violence. Because like you said, Pastor, and well, like you said, and what you didn't say is that, of course, white men are the most powerful people in America. And their voice is the voice that leads over all, that's stronger than all, because of the way this institution is set up. That's out of our control. But that's the reality of the situation. And so when you guys step in and make statements, or when you guys come out there and support us, or when you guys step in and aid us, I think it goes a whole lot further. And the impact that it has on other white males and other white women is tremendous. And I saw it firsthand. I've been dealing with it since Saturday, all from white friends, black friends. I actually was born in South Raleigh, ended up living and growing up in North Raleigh. So I have a mixture of friends of all colors. And I've been getting it all weekend. And I greatly appreciate the support.
And I would just echo that, because Jason, what you said is 100% true. What Don just said is 100% true. I can't do that. I can't craft a message that is going to make white America understand my pain, understand our frustration. I can't do that. Not only can I not do it, it should not be my responsibility.
Right.
If you consider yourself an ally as a white person in this movement, that is your job. Your job. Okay, so in our community, sometimes we will say, if your family member is acting up or somebody you love is acting up, we'll say to each other, get your cousin. Okay, get your cousin. That's y'all's
Get
job.
your people. That's right.
Get your people. That's your job. Help them understand and help them become better. But I can't talk to them, and because the problem is, ultimately, they don't respect what I have to say. Those types of folks, in order to get to a place where they will even consider reevaluating the stances that they have, I can't even break the barrier for many of those people, right? It has got to be our allies. It has got to be our white allies who take on that task, put that burden on them, on their backs, and work within their community. That is the only way it gets done.
Yeah, honestly, and that's sadly true. That's sadly truthful.
I will say, to build off of this, I've been worried about this, especially with starting with Ahmaud Arbery, but kind of carrying through Breonna Taylor and George Floyd as well. There's been such a call for white people to get in on the action that I'm worried that some of my fellow white people overvalue their role in this. Right? I mean, there's a line there, right? Like, you need to be involved. It's important for you to be involved. Go get your people. Get into the spaces you can and leverage the power that you've got. But also, your life's not the one that's at risk here from the state, right? Like it doesn't really matter if you're the one with the megaphone tomorrow, right? So be really, really careful as we kind of navigate these spaces where we can be useful. This is like a message to white people. Double check that you're not accidentally going on an ego trip as you try to figure out how to get involved.
Right.
Yeah. One thing that we talk about some is just like decentering whiteness and allowing the community of color to be the leaders. Cause like we've got to, and that's, historically as white people, we've never done that in America, but we need to follow the lead of the community of color. We need to follow our black and brown brothers and sisters here and be the support and be kind of okay, you tell us where you need us. You tell us what you need us to do. We're going to do that. And we're here to follow you in this. And I think that for me is, it's the work that I'm committed to, but like the white community hates it. Y'all know, like, the white community hates to do that. We think we need to be in charge. We need to be the ones coming up with the ideas. We need to be the ones with the megaphone. But I mean, I think you're right. Totally, like decentering white folks and helping each other to understand that.
And we need to be the one who's the majority of the population. And we're kind of afraid that we're not going to be in 20 years.
Right. But I also think that there's a long, long history in the white community of perceiving equity and equality as a threat. Right. I mean, when you've been ahead for so long, when things are suddenly even, it feels like things are unfair. And that's not how that works at all. There was a really interesting study, and I hope I'm not misquoting it. It was about 10 years ago or so. It was a gendered study. And it was showing that in classrooms where men and women speak almost about the same amount, men perceive women as dominating the conversation. And it's a perfect example of this. And I guarantee you that could translate into a different context and be about race as well. Because if you ask someone in a classroom that's about a lecture hall, it's about 50-50 white and people of color, you ask them, is there an equal number? They'll tell you no, it's predominantly minority groups.
Yeah, and white men are the fish swimming in the water that they don't perceive that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, you asked, kind of going off Jason's point, Gary, you asked like how I came to be a part of this and how I came to see this. It's following the lead. Like Jason said, I started following the lead of predominantly black women who had lived through so many different instances where they had just profound wisdom and righteous anger and intelligence and knowledge and so much to contribute to communities. And many of them were brave enough and driven enough to just call me out when I was out of line. And listening to those people is what pulled me into line as much as possible and kind of taught me about how to go get my people in my community. I think that there's a huge need to follow the lead, like Jason was saying. Follow the lead of the people who are leading the communities of color and center the voices who have been either disenfranchised or disempowered or have been threatened or that are too often silenced, right? This kind of quiet Dawn and Dawn have been talking about it, right? The folks that are not seen, the folks that are forgotten or silenced. And that's who needs to be in charge. And the more you accept that, the more you're going to learn.
Good point.
So the racism is society-wide, very intrinsic. It's been here for forever. It's not just the police, but the police are the proximate cause of what's going on right now. And how much will, if it were possible, solving that problem within our police departments spread out to the rest of society?
I'm not sure about that question. Are you saying how it affects?
Well, I doubt if we can fix the police department without fixing all of society, but that is an institution that the leadership can focus on intensely. You know, Dawn, I'm not hearing your voice, but I see you shaking your head.
No, we can fix the police department.
You think we can?
Fix the police. The police can be fixed. Yeah.
The police can be fixed.
Right.
Now, it may mean that we have to start from scratch, that we have to fire everyone and make them reapply for their jobs.
Yeah,
but it absolutely can be fixed. And today, myself, because I was one of the organizers of the larger protest on Saturday, and what the organizations that did that organizing coalesced around was a set of policy demands that we want to see happen that will change the way our police force looks. Police need to be held accountable. And here's just a couple that we can do. Number one, shine some sunshine, some light on the disciplinary records of law enforcement officers. Right now in North Carolina, it is literally against the law for you to know if there's an officer patrolling your streets who has had multiple grievances filed against him, who was fired from another police force because of use of force and then rehired by ours. Number one, we need to be able to see who is patrolling our streets. And as citizens, we should have a right to those personnel records. Number two, we should stop completely and outlaw on a national level this idea of wandering cops. Wandering cops are law enforcement officers who are bad officers, who move from one police force or law enforcement agency to another.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Because they are bad. They are dismissed from one for abuse of force, for using force, excessive force, for abusing their power. And then they are able, because of the culture of law enforcement, to go to any other agency and get a job. That needs to stop. We also need to take away qualified immunity from police officers. What is qualified immunity? Qualified immunity means that if I am wearing a police badge and I shoot and kill, or I put my knee on the neck of a man who says he can't breathe, I cannot be held personally responsible by that family. I have the immunity. I am cloaked in the immunity of the city. So here's what happens in reality. Let's say that George Floyd's family sues the city of Minneapolis. The officer, or sues the officer, right, who caused his harm. The officer is completely absolved of any financial responsibility for that. And what ends up happening is that the citizens of Minneapolis, with their tax dollars, pay for the bad actions of officers. That is why they do these things. They do these things because there is no real ramification for them for doing it. If we incentivize being good law enforcement officers by de-incentivizing being bad, everything changes. Nobody wants their money messed with. Nobody. There are lots of ways that we can change the system as it is right now. Lots of them.
Right, and it's awesome. Okay, yeah, and one thing I want to touch on again, backing up Dawn, my biggest issue with the issue of policing and how to fix it. I have a friend that's a lawyer. He was actually the head of the African American Kimball Law School last year, Mauricio Strait, Lewis, and he was having a lot of panels and dialogues with RPD and Wake County sheriffs. And one thing he brought to my attention, he said, "Don, don't you know it's easier to become a police officer in North Carolina than it is to become a barber?" He said there are really no official psychological tests going on in these police training camps to ensure whether this guy is even rationally ready to police a neighborhood, let alone just be in the police. You have guys returning from war, Iraq, all over the Middle East, Africa, with PTSD, pretty much being allowed to just walk into the police force. Now, seriously, if we're dealing with a military person, now we're already dealing with a society that has turned our police force into a militarized police force. You take this individual that just came from war, he still has these images of war in his head. You give him a badge and a gun. You put him in a community of people that don't look like him, just like the community where he left in the Middle East or Africa. And you expect those same reactions from him that he had over in Iraq and Africa not to take place over here in America, in society? It's so much more the police need to be doing before they put these guys on the front line. Before you take John out of North Raleigh that grew up in a $500,000 house and put him in Walnut Terrace or Chavis Heights in the lower income communities, he's never really had any actual dealings with the Black community or Black people. And then you give him a badge and a gun and inject him in that neighborhood and expect for community relations to be positive. It's not reasonable. It's not going to happen. So a lot has to be done by the police to fix the police. And it's not that they don't know these things.
Yeah.
They know these. They have these stats because I was able to get them. That's why I know they have them. They have these stats and they know these things. These things are talked about. We have talked about it with them. And I mean, I don't know, like I haven't dealt with any other jurisdictions, but I say it, RPD does not budge. They don't compromise. For my dealings with RPD, they refuse to compromise from the top down. And that's our biggest problem here in Raleigh with them. And fixing them, like I said, I don't know, it's going to have to be done by them. Somebody in there is going to have to step up and take the initiative.
The Raleigh Police Department doesn't run itself. It's what city council is in charge of them ultimately.
Well, from the top down. I'm talking about from the mayor, city councilman. I'm talking through the entire chain of command, not just the ones wearing the suits. I'm talking about the ones sitting behind the desk, the mayors, the councilmen, the councilwomen, all of them.
This just takes a perspective shift. I mean, I want to go back to what Dawn was saying with those policy recommendations, right? If you hear those policy recommendations and you think, well, you got to have those things in place because that's what it takes to have police, right? If you think, oh, you got to protect that person's service record for their personal protection, and you got to protect that person's right in case they're in a tough situation that involves or requires violence, then what you're doing inherently is deciding that protecting that individual cop's personal identity and experience is more important than protecting the community they're supposed to be in service of. So it's a shift. There's always going to be an inherent risk with any policy you put forward. But right now, the risk is too heavily carried by the same people over and over and over and over again. And it is 100% along racial lines and 100% along income and 100% along social standing. And that can't continue to be happening. You've got to either do You've got to change these policies so that the people that are protected are the right people to be protected.
So let me ask what I think is going to be a pretty clueless white guy question. The chief of police in Raleigh is Cassandra Brown, is a Black woman. How helpful or not is that?
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Can I say real quick? Okay. Don't take this wrong way, but I don't understand why white people don't understand that just because you put a black person in charge of us, that's gonna make everything right.
So yes,
Like what?
clueless,
Like where do y'all get that from?
Clueless white person question. Okay, I'll own that.
Like every time, like it just reminds me of the whole Obama thing. Got a black president. I mean, everything for y'all gonna be fixed now.
Yeah. But what can she do? Yeah.
Well, she should have followed the lead of the Durham police chief, and she didn't. Now I don't know if that was because of the power above her, or she just didn't make the right, or she just made a bad decision. But again, going back to my point, just because you put a black person in charge does not make it right for the black fight at all.
Yeah. You know what this makes me think of? I saw a sign this week that said, or it might have been a post on social media, and I don't go for those kind of things, but this one really got me. And it was saying, if you have 10 bad cops and 100 bad cops that don't remove the 10 bad cops, then you have 110 bad cops.
Exactly.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right. And that's what you would expect from a police chief, right? If someone's really doing their job for the black community as a black person, you shouldn't see this many issues.
Right.
Yeah, and I think everybody's already said it, but I'm just going because it's worth saying again. Just because we have the same skin color, just because we look the same, does not mean we have the same reactions towards, relationship with, or care for other people that look like us. What we have to acknowledge is that the reality, there is a very real phenomenon of becoming blue, right? And when these folks put on these uniforms, I don't care who they are, they change and become, and their prime allegiances are always going to be to that uniform. Blue. So just because somebody looks like us, looks like me, it certainly doesn't mean that they are all, and let me be clear, I am not by any means saying that is true across the board for every black police officer, we are not speaking in, what we are speaking about though is a culture, right? A culture that creates this us versus them type mentality. And I think what happens is that in order to survive, once you put on that uniform, you have to make a choice. And you have to decide which us you are. And if you are, and I've heard from officers Raleigh Police Department officers who do not want to be identified, who have said to me in no uncertain terms, if I were to say these officers are bad and what they did was bad, my life would be in danger because the rest of them would turn on me. I would be an outcast. They wouldn't protect me. They wouldn't help me. I hear that. And again, so when I say we got to clear it out, like the police force can be fine, but we need to start from scratch because the culture is rotten. And even those officers who believe that things need to change are afraid and intimidated by the dominating culture inside of law enforcement that thinks that it is okay for them to dehumanize and murder and kill Black people with impunity in the streets.
And I think as we watch Raleigh politics, as I've seen in the last couple of years, the police department has refused any sort of citizens oversight or citizens advisory in any way. And also recently with the city council itself, dismantling the community advocacy sort of forums and groups. So we've seen, like, in the last couple of years, a minimizing of citizens' voice and sort of a consolidation of power, while the business community now has unprecedented access, with the mayor herself being part of the business community, getting on the payroll. What we're seeing now is a consolidation of business running the city. And if business is running the city, then, we know that story. We know that citizens' voices will be less and less, and when citizens' voice becomes less, community of color suffers more. And so I think we're seeing sort of a hole across the board in Raleigh.
I mean, we know Raleigh is a city. First of all, any city of that size has got to have a citizen oversight committee. I mean, that's obviously. Second of all, I mean, Raleigh's building up this reputation as being a kind of a city that's on the up and up, right? I mean, the Raleigh-Durham area in general gets put on how many top 10 lists every single year about best places to move for new business, for new families, whatever food, whatever it may be. But when you're on the up and up like that, what you tend to do if you're not paying attention to your community is you tend to lean into that accelerated growth narrative. And in the process, you endorse gentrification. You push people out of places that they deserve to be in, and you start ignoring community voices to the point that business and progress is above all else. And your infrastructure in terms of the kind of pieces that make up your actual city, the people that you employ, the people that you serve, and your things like your police department start to slip in quality, start to slip in how in tune they are to the actual community. And so you sacrifice your people for a new identity. And Raleigh is right in that vein right now, and it needs to be really, really careful, or it's just going to keep getting worse.
Yeah. I'm sorry. And that is reflected not only in the way law enforcement is allowed to act with impunity, but in every aspect of the way that Raleigh's leadership makes decisions. We can look at the gentrification. We can look at the lack of affordable housing for people who live in Raleigh. We can look at the way that the Raleigh City leadership is literally pushing people out of communities that have always been Black communities, that are historically Black communities, simply because there are now white folks that want to live closer to downtown, right? We need to address all of those. And we cannot afford to not discuss the intersectionality of all of those issues and the way that they all play into the way that Raleigh runs itself, and any city that is headed down the path that Raleigh is headed down, and the collateral damage to Black and Brown communities that come as a result of it, without being intentional and deliberate about how we take care of the least of us, how we make sure that everyone is taken care of and everyone has secure housing. Then this is what happens when you exacerbate that gap between the haves and the have-nots. In that gap is where revolutions live. In that gap is where revolutions thrive.
Exactly, 100%.
So there's not going to be just one way to get where you want to go.
No, it's impossible.
But there must be concrete steps to take, and are we taking any of them?
So you have to use an approach where, okay, there's so many areas where we need to redirect our energy. One person can't do it all. Nothing stops us from saying, okay, a group of us will deal with this, we'll deal with this, we'll deal with this, we deal with this stuff unilaterally, and then we come together and see what we have. But it's not like we all have to focus on just police brutality. We can focus on police brutality. They can focus on intercommunity violence. They can focus on drug abuse and alcohol abuse. It doesn't have to be one thing. It's a lot of us. We can tackle all of them at the same time. We need to be addressing all of the issues simultaneously anyway, every single day of our life. Not just us, you guys also. Because what affects us affects you, obviously, as you can see what happened downtown Raleigh.
Yeah.
Because you can keep ignoring us and you're going to keep getting that.
I mean, you know what Don was saying about intersectionality too. I mean, I think it's important for people to understand that you could be doing a wide variety of things and you could be in part addressing this problem or worsening this problem, right? And this is so multifaceted. So I'll give you a really good example. If you are someone right now who is offering childcare, that is so important for people that need to protest and demonstrate and organize. That's a very simple thing. And if you think, you know what, I'm not really affecting the face of police brutality in Raleigh, that's a critical role. If you're not there to provide security for the organizers who are out in the streets trying to make sure that this is heard and pushed onto the desks of those folks, this all starts crumbling down. So this is going to take hundreds of thousands of people in hundreds of thousands of little ways. But it doesn't have to be, hey, what's the silver bullet, right? What's the magic trick that knocks this out immediately? It's going to be a lot of little wins.
I tell people, just do something. That's it. Just do something. And it'll all come together.
Jason, you haven't said very much here in this section.
That's okay. That's okay.
Well, at your church, I'm sure you're continuously active in making change.
Well, we try, so we see our role as standing for justice, and we believe God is a God of the oppressed, and the way of Jesus is a way of peacemaking and justice initiating in the best way that we can. So we're trying to do what we had Dawn over a couple months ago and talk about what her work in Emancipate NC. We work with the LGBT Center, trying to stand up for the rights of the LGBT community here in the city. We work with Haven House and Hope Center at Pullen with displaced youth and foster care kids that are coming out. We do a lot of work, but like our thrust is we want to help educate people about justice. We want to help people educate people about reconciliation, about whiteness in general. And our role is a lot of the problems. I mean, if we're honest, a lot of the problems that we see has been caused by the church, and either the propagating of terrible theology, or this sort of shrinking away from responsibility because, we don't have any responsibility. Like the white church should be active in the community. We should be agents of good, and not just agents of ourselves. And so we really want to be that good in the world to do as much good as we can for as many people as we can. And, that's going to involve conflict. We're part of One Wake, the new organizing group here in Raleigh. I have a long history in community organizing from Milwaukee. And we see like that changes cities when we get together in a broad-based coalition with Black and brown and white-skinned people. We come together and we're committed to a common cause and to hold our elected officials accountable for that. And so I see the work of Jesus as the work of political organizing, and see Christianity as the work of organizing justice and shalom, that idea of flourishing for every single person in the community. So we're trying to do our part there, and always believing we can do more, and so trying to do that more.
Is your congregation pretty integrated, or is it mostly white?
It is mostly white. We're probably about 20% non-white, which is not so. We have some. A lot of our leadership team is not white. We've been really intentional about that, to have a church that we say. We need voices and the wisdom and the leadership and the experiences of the non-white community leading here at the church. And so, yeah.
Pastor, this is the South, where barbershops, beauty salons, and churches are the most segregated locations.
Yep.
In almost every city, county, town. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, and it makes sense. It makes sense to me. Like the white churches are not safe spaces for a lot of people of color. And so, white churches have to work really hard at kind of deconstructing our theology, our whiteness, our history. And that makes white people really uncomfortable. But that's the work. That's the work that we have to do throughout our churches around America.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I just want to add a small anecdote about the whiteness of Christianity in the church. So my family and I took a trip to Europe last summer, and it was just such a profound reminder of how deeply embedded the church is, especially the Catholic Church, in creating the system of white supremacy that we see globally. And my daughter, who is 16, we had toured the Vatican, and we were walking around Rome for, 11 hours or so. And so we get to the Sistine Chapel. And by this point, she's my child, right? So by this point, she has literally reached her absolute limit. So we're standing in the Sistine Chapel, and she just starts yelling, "Jesus was black." And I thought, oh my God, we done flew 16 hours to get thrown out of the Sistine Chapel because my child is having a full out Black revolutionary meltdown. But I say all that to say it is so important to understand that these issues that we are fighting, that these systems of racial oppression and white supremacy that we are deconstructing are centuries old. These things are, and they are bigger than the city, than the county, than the state that you live in. These are global issues. And if we don't start acknowledging, and it's so hard because we live inside of our own bubble to understand the calamity of what white supremacy is. And going to Europe for us and for my baby was like, wow. Like she complete, like that's all she talked about once we got back home for a really long time. But yeah, and it's unfortunate that everybody doesn't get the opportunity to see that historical, how big this problem is and how much bigger it is than, coffee. That's cute, but we need to do real systemic work to make real systemic.
Yeah. Jason, it's really cool to hear you talk about this. I had a friend of mine who I really admired. Is one of the most, I think, driven and militant activists I've met in a long time, and she was just a dynamo at every single demonstration. But she was also very, very Christian. And I asked her, I said, do you ever have trouble reconciling that? Does that ever feel dissonant in your head? And she said, no, my Jesus is table flipping Jesus. Like, and I love that. I think about that all the time.
I just saw that on a meme today. That's crazy.
All right, one last thing that I would like to bring up, and it's a step back to what we've been talking about before. One of Trump's cabinet people, I think National Security Advisor, I don't remember who it was, recently said that 99.5% of the cops are good, and just a few bad apples. I think that if that were the case, it would be really easy to fix. So I'm suspecting that's not the case.
That's not the case. And let me say this. I'm going to go back to an analogy that Dawn gave earlier. And it's one that I like to use. And I use it all the time when I speak, because I'm a barber. So I come into contact with all kinds of law enforcement working in the barber shop, from sheriffs to RPD to state troopers to U.S. Marshals, federal agents, ATF, you name it. I'm cut in. Okay. And so, and I was just telling one of U.S. Marshals, matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, before the COVID thing started, I said, listen, he kept talking good cop, kept saying good cop, good cop, good cop. And I'm not one of those bad cops. I'm not one of those guys. I would never do that. I said, have you ever seen it? He said, yeah. I said, did you report it? He said, no. And I said, you just as bad as the person that did it.
Yeah.
A good cop who observes a bad cop being a bad cop is also a bad cop.
But as Dawn said, the police that she knows who told you about that and said they were afraid for their life to report it.
Well, sometimes you have to stand up and look for your eyes.
Well, they're probably not going to be able to do it one at a time. We need something that lets them stand together.
Sometimes you have to stand up and look fear in the eyes and fight for what you believe in and be ready to go to the end with it.
But would there be something that would allow them to have strength of being more than one at a time? Because one guy doing
those policy changes that I talked about earlier. If we create policy changes that make it not only necessary but mandatory for you to report, or else you lose your job, you lose your law enforcement certification.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If we create a culture, if we create policies that say I gotta see which one of you is cutting up, right? You create policies that say, if you don't report a fellow officer who you have seen abuse his power, you are just as guilty as he is, and you will lose your livelihood along with that person losing their livelihood. That's how we protect those folks. We give them some cover, but that's got to come from, there has got to be a political will for that to happen. And right now in Raleigh, we do not have a political will.
And the perfect example is what just happened in Minneapolis with Officer Tao, the Asian officer. Do you remember that? Okay.
Yeah, he was the guy standing in front of everybody.
Right. If we took the cameras away, do you believe he would have reported that officer? No.
Nope.
No. I mean, let's be honest. If he allowed it to happen and made sure nobody intervened or interrupted, do you believe if there were no cameras involved, he would have said, you know what, that officer was wrong for kneeling his neck? I'm 99% sure he wouldn't have.
If there were no cameras involved, we never would have heard of it.
We would have never heard. You
And
just
the
heard
thing
a
too
black. You would have heard a black man died. And me and that was all you heard.
We need better research about all this too. I mean, the problem with saying 99.5% of cops are good is that the person saying that doesn't actually want to know what percent of cops are good.
Right.
Right? Like has no interest in learning what the actual number would be.
Right.
You know, I'll give you a good example. There's a meme that goes around sometimes that talks about the fact that about 40% of police families experience some form of domestic violence. That comes from a study that was in the 90s. So it's well over 20 years old, this data, right? And the issue is that between the late 90s and now, how hard do you think it's been to get access to communities where you can get police data, or you can get funding for that research, or you can get access to city councilors who are willing to share police information? Absolutely not. It's the same issue that we have with firearms, right? I mean, there are blocks left and right about researching the effect of firearms on Americans because the NRA doesn't want you to research the effect of firearms on
I
Americans.
want you to know the truth.
That's right. So we need more people to want to know what percent of cops are a problem and then finance the answer to that question.
But more importantly, we need to have either a state or a federal mandate that information is collected and that you have to report it, that you have to report the activities, you have to report your stops, you need to provide data. And again, going back to Raleigh, which is what we've been talking about today, while the city council voted to approve a citizens oversight board, one of the things specifically that they said that board could not do was collect data.
It's ridiculous.
That makes no sense. That makes no sense.
Can you really be interested in creating cultural change within your law enforcement agency is if when you create an oversight board, you tell the oversight board you can't have any oversight?
Why is the city council afraid of that?
You can't produce any data from the
police are not
information that you're gathering?
So police are not bound by Freedom of Information Act?
No, they absolutely are not. In North Carolina, there is a statute that specifically excludes them and their personnel recorers from the Freedom of Information Act. Absolutely.
Wow. So is the city council?
You know what, God, as a matter of fact, I wrote a whole blog about this about 3 days ago. After we're finished, I'm a forward it to you so you can see it.
Yeah, let me know. Yeah. I'll put it in the show notes. Is the city council constricted by state law that their oversight board can't release data, or is it the city council itself that is just chicken to do it?
It is the city council. The only thing that the city council would need a higher level of approval for is giving the oversight board subpoena power to subpoena law enforcement, to subpoena folks, do investigation. And that is something that the fact that they do not have the authority to do that is something that they have relied on very heavily for why they didn't want to create the board in the first place. But myself and a group of other folks met with the governor just yesterday. Ironically enough, because, and I can assure you that the governor wouldn't have called us to meet with him if folks hadn't tore up downtown Raleigh. If all we had was a peaceful march, he wouldn't have called us on a Saturday to come in and talk to him. So the other reality that we have to be very, very clear about is that while we talk about the fact that we need people to protest and we should denounce violent protest, the reality is violent protest historically is the only thing that makes America move, right? This was no different. And what I said to him, what we all said to him collectively was, you have trouble with the General Assembly and getting them to pass laws, but you know what? You also have executive power. So why don't you use your executive power to give oversight to some of these boards? You know, he seemed to entertain the idea. I can't say what he's going to do with it, but what I know is that if we can't skin this cat one way, we got to figure out other ways to skin it. And if you do not have the political will to help us, then you need to say it.
Right.
So everything, all of the action steps that you can take, that I can take, that we all can take, ultimately end up at a ballot box that I am aware that we're trying real hard to keep some of you from being able to access. But isn't that the last step in effecting change? And I'm not sure why we couldn't elect city council people that would have the spine to do some of these things, but we haven't. I live in Cary, so I can't vote for the Raleigh City Council, but is it the ballot box that's the last step?
It's more that I think the ballot box is the first step, and it's actually not even the first step. I would look just before that, because you need a pipeline of candidates who share these values and represent the communities that are most needing to be heard, right? So what we need to do is invest in programs that educate about running for office, that encourage people to go in that route if they want to go in that route, or to affect change outside of the political system entirely. There are other ways to drive change in communities that aren't rooted in the ballot box too. And unfortunately, more often than not, this all comes back to money, right? I mean, you got to finance campaigns, you got to donate to candidates that you want to see in places of power, and if you don't, they're going to fall by the wayside, because every single political campaign from city council all the way up to president is a money-driven monstrous machine. And at some point, you've got to build some momentum. The easiest way to build momentum, right, is to have early-stage donations. So we need to have folks out there who are looking for political candidates or local leaders that they want to enforce and back, and put their wallet behind those folks.
So Zach, I didn't deliberately tee that up for you, but it occurs to me. New leader council fellow, I pretty much did.
That's true. I didn't go full blown promotion there, but.
So before we close out, let me just throw this little tidbit of information out that I'm getting from my retired mother, who does nothing at this point. She's a retired school teacher, but she does nothing but watch the news and keep me abreast of all breaking and new information. Apparently, the autopsy report that was released about George Floyd was a complete lie. Wow. And that information is hitting the airways, I imagine, as we speak. And I think that will have, it's going to have an impact on what we see tonight.
Right. That's going to have an impact on what happens next in the streets.
It's going to have an impact on what we see.
Yeah, the New York Times is reporting that the independent lawyers for George Floyd's family report that an independent autopsy report, asphyxiation is cause of death.
Well, why would
he? Surprise! Instead of chronic heart disease.
Right. Pre-existing condition. It was a pre-existing condition last week.
Right.
So do you all want to take back your prediction that it'll be a calm night in Raleigh?
Yeah, I'm taking it back.
Yeah, I'm taking it back.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting to watch the founders and co-founders of Black Lives Matter talk about this, because they have been so vocal on Twitter over the last few days of just needing updates on the charges. Like there's so little focus on the police officers who were involved in this right now. What is Minneapolis doing? Like where are we? Someone give an update. Because if the only thing we're going to get is that the private autopsy reveals something completely different than the public report, that's the definition of how you stoke a response, right? So if you don't want that, get information out.
Right. It's no. So again, what we're seeing here, we've had this very robust conversation, but ultimately what will govern what happens is the problem of having a system that is deeply rooted in protecting itself and deeply invested in protecting itself at the expense of Black and brown lives, at the expense of Black and brown bodies. So, I don't know what's going to happen tonight, but I suspect it's not going to be good.
Yeah. So I was saying we need.
And I'm sorry, let me just say, It's not going to be good, but it is all going to be the direct result of a country that has ignored and denied justice for much too long.
Yeah. It won't be good. It will eventually be over. On the last show, I looked at a long list from Wikipedia of civil unrest in the U.S. It was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of entries, some well-known, some rarely heard from. most of them, maybe every one to one degree or another, moved the needle forward just a little bit. And this week will be one of those things that moves things forward, but not far enough, just a little bit. And if voting is an important part, having, as you said, Zach, having someone to vote for is a step before voting. So thank you all for being on the show. Talking about it, I guess, helps a little bit. Elizabeth Crudup said, you guys needed to talk. I was glad to put you on Zoom here and put you on the channel. I wish I could give you WRAL's audience. Maybe someday Triangle Talk Show can do something like that. And I'd like to invite you all back. Whenever you have something that you want to talk to the community about, let me know. When I think of something that you would be good for, I will come ask you to participate. And if, particularly Dawn and Don, I have 2 white co-hosts on the show, and no regular African American participation. So, if you say, "Oh, that Triangle Talk Show thing that could use a little bit of cultural diversity," and you got the time, we're on live Sunday afternoons at 4:00.
Don, that's got your name written all over it.
You know it. You too.
Come on along anytime you want. I mean, this is the invitation. All right.
Oh, I have a whole list of things I want to share with you.
Okay, let me tell everybody who we had. We had Don Lewis down there in the lower right, community activist and barber, and Dawn Blagrove from Emancipate NC, and an attorney and a woman who gets to go meet with the governor, I've learned. So that's pretty cool. The Reverend Jason Butler on the lower left from Open Table United Methodist Church. I hope that your church has been safe. In the violence that we have seen, have they left the churches alone?
Our church is fine. I think First Baptist Church downtown suffered some damage on Saturday night.
Okay, so you're a little bit outside of downtown.
Yeah.
Okay. One hope they would, but who knows? And Zack Fowler, the new Leaders Council, a fellow there, not bad for the kid. contributions for the show. My name is Gary Pierce, and this has been episode 92, an activist episode. Raleigh's Floyd protest, riot, ? I guess it was, sort of. But I'm gonna go with this sign that I put in here. No justice, no peace. June 1st, 2020.
No racist police.
You got it, Don.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
We will add that, and I will sign the program off. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, guys. It was great.
And over and out. I gotta let the picture hang here for a moment. Otherwise, YouTube cuts us off too fast. And now I can push the goodbye